For me, qualitative research is really anything that you're not going to try to project to a large population. You're pretty much trying to understand a particular group of people. It might be a particular audience segment. You want to have a range of their ideas. You're not so interested in generalizing that back out to an entire population. So it's not really the methods so much as your intentions that distinguishes qualitative research from quantitative research. To go into greater depth about it, you're really looking for usually meaning as opposed to the what, and you're not looking for facts. You're looking at the attitudes and understandings that underlie those facts. So for example, if you know that 9 out of 10 dentists recommend this gum, what you're going to use your qualitative research for is to find out why they recommend the gum. It's really, you can use qualitative research before or after you've done some of your quantitative work. Sometimes you use it to help you develop a quantitative instrument. Sometimes you use it to try to figure out why did you get those answers that you got. But it's really your search for meaning that you use qualitative methods for. There's a range of methods that you can use that are all qualitative that we use to sort of figure out how our intended user would either use a product or a service and how they feel about it. And we would tend to use things, we might call them situational or environmental kinds of methods, which mean you're going into a place. You yourself, the researcher, you're trying to get as close as you can into the shoes of that person. So sometimes we'll go into their homes. A lot of this comes from the private sector. The detergent companies have done a ton of this, where they washed, how do women wash dishes? And they ask them questions while they're washing the dishes themselves. Or they sit there at the breakfast table and watch a mom, is she smearing butter on the toast for her kids, or how is she preparing it? Really trying to get a sense of how is our product going to be used in the actual location. And so it's very observational, and if the participant is willing, you sit there and you're chit-chatting with them and you're asking them questions. So those are sort of situations where you're actually going on site in the real location, in real time, observing and asking questions. And I would contrast to what I would call more audience research, which is where I'm basically just talking to you, but we're sitting someplace else. It's probably some kind of a facility that you've rented for the day. And I'm asking you questions about it, but we're not really in the same moment in your life, looking at it from your perspective as it actually happens. If you're really working on an actual product or service, the environmental situation is without equal, because people tend to give you an ideal situation when they're speaking about it. And a lot of this we learned from some of the early research we used to do internationally, and even if you just thought about something simple like washing your hands, and we found out how complex that could be, how many steps were involved, how many resources you needed. But if you ask someone just to sit around and talk to you about how do they wash their hands, unless they're really, so thorough in thinking about it, they usually will forget quite a bit of what they have to go through. When you're doing audience research and you're going to do more of this kind of asking you questions, you have an opportunity of working with one person by themselves. We call that an in-depth interview versus a group, a focus group interview. Very often we might confuse, when's the right time to use either one. We tend to say we're going to use in-depth interviews. Well, first of all, if you really are talking to someone we consider a gatekeeper or some other kind of an expert intermediary, and so you want to ask them a lot of things and you just want to get their opinion on it. But also when it's a sensitive topic, they might be embarrassed to speak about it in front of others, or you think there's a high likelihood that they might, I won't say lie, but they might lie about, what they're going to tell you if they have to do it in front of other people. So very often we would choose an in-depth. So it's either to get a lot of information or it's mostly for the privacy. Focus groups, often people don't take advantage of the group dynamic, and they kind of ask them more like a group of individual interviews. They'll say, what do you think? And what do you think? And what do you think? And we've always talked about that not being a very effective way to do a focus group. The best moderators really do let the group speak to each other and learn when to cut that off and when to bring in the next question. But you'll see that, the members of the group can actually take the topic a lot further than maybe you should do as the moderator. I've gone through a lot of experiences trying to identify people who make good moderators. The best moderator is actually someone that you'd want to talk to. And this is often not someone who's a professional anything necessarily. Of course, we hire professional moderators all the time, but if you're working in a setting where you have people who deal with the public a lot, they might be answering your phones, they might be your receptionists. Very often those people have the people skills that you're looking for. They make wonderful focus group moderators, because the first thing we say is, I'm not an expert in this subject. I really want to hear what your opinion is. And it takes someone who can play a bit self-effacing, and also I always say you got to play a bit dumb. You have to say sometimes, I don't understand what you mean. Can you go into more depth on that? Even though you perfectly well understand what that person means, but you want to hear them say it and you want to hear the others say it. So, people who are good hostesses or hosts at dinner parties, these are the kinds of skills that you want. And I'd say you use all those same social skills to bring out your reluctant people and to kind of try to quiet down the ones who are speaking too much. Now, there are some, there's a whole list of do's and don'ts and tips. And the best resource that I think you can find for that is that it's basically a kit that was put out by the Academy for Educational Development. It includes a book called Handbook for Excellence in Focus Group. And that was originally written by Mary Debus. And there's also, I believe, a manual and a video that gives you a lot of suggestions for how to sort of, handle the dynamics of the group, keep things going, and quiet down the guy who just won't stop talking and that sort of thing. I have two things that I love to do in focus groups. And sometimes this works better when you're at kind of the testing phase, or you can also do it in the very beginning phase. I like to use, I guess we call them projective techniques. And I'll show a picture. You can almost pick up any picture out of any magazine. And I'm telling you, like, that thing, everything I learned in kindergarten. I think I learned this one in first grade, where the teacher would give you a picture from a magazine and tell you to write a story about it. And you can do the same kind of thing in a focus group. Just get people to make up a story, and you bring in a picture or a drawing of something that you're interested in. Very often, I'll ask people to make up a soap opera about a character, and that this is the dilemma that they have. And what I'll ask them to do is not just make it up and tell a narrative, but I'll ask the members of the focus group to act it out. So the one thing I'll do for a projective technique is bring in a picture and ask them questions about the person in the picture, so they are projecting into the picture. And then when we get to a point of, say, well, what would she do now? What would she say to her son? What would she say to her boyfriend? And I go, okay, wait, don't tell me. Let's see it. You be so-and-so, you be so-and-so. Act it out. And then we get into a role play situation. And both of those techniques, one, they break it up, make people sort of pay more attention. Two, they take away the emphasis from you, the individual who's answering. And yet, I think that they tend to convey more honesty than if I'm saying to you, well, what do you think most people think about this? Because that's another technique to use. Sometimes we'll say, what do you think your best friend would say about this? But then people really think about their best friend, and maybe their best friend has a completely different opinion than they do. So I found sort of showing pictures and letting them project into pictures, or role-playing, to be two techniques that I like to bring into focus groups. What I don't like to do is, really make people think hard about questions. The questions have to be very easy in a focus group. If they get too complex, everyone sits there and sort of studies and tries to think about it, and it really slows down your group a lot. I want to talk about something else besides focus groups, though, because I think that for marketing research, of course, some of the most effective stuff is mall intercept interviews, which are like quick, in-depth interviews. I mean, you're grabbing one person, you're talking to them. Central location intercepts can be done in a cornfield. They can be done anywhere. It's just basically, again, it's a little bit of a cross between the audience interview method and the environmental method, because you're sort of going someplace where the people are, and you're speaking to them briefly, but in some way you're relating to it. There's an awful lot of work that can be done in supermarkets around the products that are being sold, going to facilities. If you want to know why are some people physically active, go to the places where they are and find out what they're doing, as much as, the folks who aren't doing it. So there's just a lot of sort of going to where the activity is, where what the behavior that you want to see happens, and speaking to the people who are doing it. The usual pet peeve people talk about is when people take qualitative research and try to generalize from it. So, for example, if I do 4 focus groups and I'm going to tell you 80% of my participants said blah, blah, blah. And I think everyone knows that's a no-no. My own pet peeve is because I feel that if you have the opportunity to have 8 people sit down and talk to you for 2 hours and you don't engage them enough to give your creative team something to work with, you've really wasted that opportunity. And I feel that focus groups are a tool for the creative process. So you want to be able to have real people talking. You want to hear their voices. And I don't mean just literally give the tape or give the transcript. I mean, you really want to get inside of them. And you want to have them speaking in a way that someone who has a creative background is inspired. And not just the why once or twice, but I mean really let people hear it. And so, for example, going back again to some of the research I used to do in other countries, we would have our research report, but we certainly would share the transcripts, if not the actual tapes, with our creative team, because they would just about create the spot or the message right from what they heard on that tape, because they could hear the tone in the woman's voice or how this man was describing something. And, it's hard to explain the creative process, but it inspired them as opposed to just informed them.